A woman stormed onto the plane with the kind of confidence that made people step aside without knowing why. She marched straight past the rows of economy seats, barely glancing at the people already seated. Her heels clicked sharply against the narrow aisle floor as if announcing that she belonged somewhere more important than everyone else. When she reached the first-class cabin, she didn't slow down, hesitate, or even check the seat numbers. Instead, she dropped herself into one of the plush seats, threw her handbag on the side table, and exhaled loudly as if she had just conquered a battlefield. Passengers nearby exchanged looks. Some raised their eyebrows. Others lowered their screens to see what was going on. A couple of people whispered, wondering if she was in some kind of hurry or if she was just rude. But the woman acted as if she owned the aircraft. She didn't bother placing her bag in the overhead compartment or even buckling her seatbelt. She simply stretched her legs, pulled out her phone, and started tapping aggressively as if the world was keeping her behind schedule. A few minutes later, the rightful seatholder approached the same row. She walked quietly, gracefully, with the calm presence of someone who didn't need to announce her importance. She was a black woman dressed in an elegant charcoal business suit, her hair neatly styled, her steps soft but confident. She checked the seat number, looked at the woman occupying it, then checked again just to be sure she wasn't mistaken. Her boarding pass clearly showed the seat as her own. "Excuse me," she said politely, her voice firm but gentle. "I believe you're sitting in my seat." The woman lounging in the seat didn't look up at first. She kept scrolling through her phone as if the person speaking didn't deserve her attention. After a few seconds, she finally lifted her eyes, scanned the standing woman from head to toe, and smirked. "This is my seat," she said curtly. "You must be confused." "I'm not confused," the rightful passenger replied calmly. "This is seat 2A. That is what's printed on my boarding pass." The seated woman scoffed. "Well, I'm sure it's a mistake on your ticket. They do that sometimes, you know. Maybe you should go back and check with the flight attendants. Economy is behind you." That comment drew a few gasps from the surrounding passengers. Some shook their heads. Others pretended not to listen but were clearly paying attention. The black woman didn't react emotionally. She simply repeated, with the same quiet dignity, "Ma'am, this is my assigned seat." The woman in the seat leaned forward, placed her elbows on the armrests like she was guarding territory, and narrowed her eyes. "Listen," she said in a low, irritated voice, "people like you don't belong in first class. Just go back to your section and save us both some time." Her tone was dripping with arrogance. It wasn't just a refusal, it was an insult. Passengers visibly stiffened. A man across the aisle whispered, "Did she really just say that?" A woman 2 rows back muttered, "Unbelievable." But the black woman stayed composed. She didn't raise her voice or argue. There was a strength in her silence, a steady confidence that suggested she was used to confronting these kinds of moments with grace rather than anger. A flight attendant approached, clearly sensing tension. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, looking between the 2 women. "Yes," the seated woman said immediately. "She's in the wrong seat. Can you please escort her back to where she belongs?" She waved her hand dismissively, as if brushing away an inconvenience rather than speaking about another human being. The flight attendant turned to the standing woman. "May I see your boarding pass, ma'am?" She handed it over without hesitation. The attendant checked the ticket, rechecked the seat number, and frowned. "This is correct. You are assigned to seat 2A. The seated woman snapped, "Well, obviously something is wrong. That can't be right." The attendant remained polite but firm. "Ma'am," she said to the woman in the seat, "may I see your boarding pass as well?" The woman pretended not to hear. She turned her face toward the window, still clutching her phone. When the attendant asked again, the woman sighed dramatically and said, I don't have it right now. It's in my bag somewhere. But trust me, this is the seat they told me to take." Passengers exchanged skeptical looks. The woman's claim didn't sound convincing. Even the flight attendant's expression tightened slightly, though she maintained her professional tone. "Ma'am, we can't resolve this until I see your ticket. I said it's in my bag." The woman barked. Do you really expect me to dig through all my things because she's confused about where she belongs? That was the second time she implied the standing woman didn't belong there. The passenger's patience was clearly being tested, but she still did not raise her voice. She simply looked at the attendant and said, "I'm happy to wait while she finds her ticket." The flight attendant nodded. "Ma'am," she said more firmly this time, "I need to see your ticket now." The woman stood up halfway, rummaging through her bag with exaggerated annoyance, making sure everyone could see how inconvenienced she felt. She threw items around, sunglasses, a makeup pouch, a wallet, but noticeably, no boarding pass appeared. "I don't know where it is," she snapped. "Maybe the gate agent forgot to give it back." "That doesn't usually happen," the attendant said. "Well, it happened today." Her voice echoed through the cabin, earning more stares. The flight attendant tried to maintain control, but the situation was clearly escalating. She stepped back and said, "Let me get the captain." She left quickly, her shoes tapping urgently against the floor. The black woman still stood there, waiting silently, her hands loosely folded in front of her. She didn't appear angry. If anything, she seemed disappointed but unsurprised, as though she had encountered this kind of treatment before. The woman in the seat rolled her eyes. "You see," she muttered loudly. "This is ridiculous. They're wasting time over nothing. Some people always try to take advantage of situations." The standing woman did not reply. A few moments later, the captain himself walked into the first-class cabin. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere. He carried the authority of someone who had seen every kind of situation play out thousands of feet above the ground, and he wasn't someone easily fooled. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked, looking between both women. The flight attendant recapped the situation. The rightful passenger had the correct boarding pass, the seated woman refused to produce hers, and the confrontation was delaying preparations for takeoff. The captain turned to the standing woman first. "May I see your boarding pass, ma'am?" She handed it to him. He glanced at it, and his expression softened subtly, as though he recognized something or someone. But he kept his composure and turned to the seated woman. "Ma'am," he said in a firm but calm voice, "I need your boarding pass." "I told them already," she snapped. "I don't have it right now. But that's not my fault. The system messed up. She shouldn't even be in first class." The captain's demeanor changed. He stood up straighter, his eyes sharp. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "this passenger has every right to be here. And you have offered no proof that you do." She glared at him. "Are you taking her side just because she's pretending to be someone important?" Passengers gasped again. The tension thickened. The captain lowered his voice, but his words were cold and clear. "She isn't pretending to be anything. And let me say this very clearly so there is no confusion, this seat was reserved for her, and she has more right to be here than anyone else on this aircraft." The woman in the seat scoffed. "Oh please. Who even is she?" The captain took a small breath, his patience thinning. The standing woman looked down modestly, almost embarrassed by the attention. She clearly preferred privacy. But the captain felt compelled to make a point. "Ma'am," he finally said, "she is the CEO of this airline." The entire cabin fell silent. Passengers stared. A few mouths dropped open. The woman in the stolen seat froze, her arrogance draining from her face. She blinked several times, as though the captain's words couldn't possibly be true. Flight attendants rushed over as soon as they realized the argument wasn't calming down on its own. Their quick footsteps and practiced smiles tried to hide the tension that was beginning to ripple through the first-class cabin, but everyone could see the worry in their eyes. They knew that unresolved conflict before takeoff could delay the flight, upset passengers, and cause problems far beyond a simple seat dispute. Still, they approached with gentle professionalism, hoping to ease the situation before it escalated any further. As they gathered around the row, passengers leaned in without being obvious, some pretending to adjust their headrests, others pretending to scroll on their phones, all of them watching closely. Even those at the front of the cabin, who were used to luxury and privacy, were unable to ignore the drama playing out a few feet away. A first-class cabin rarely produced excitement, and people couldn't help but be drawn to the unfolding conflict. The woman sitting in the stolen seat crossed her arms tightly, glaring at anyone who dared come close. Her chin lifted higher every time someone questioned her claim to the seat, as though arrogance alone could secure her position. She didn't flinch, didn't shift, didn't even show a hint of doubt. Her posture was rigid, defiant, as though she believed that by simply refusing to move, she could outlast the truth. Every time a flight attendant spoke to her, she made sure her voice carried across the cabin, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear, not because she wanted justice but because she wanted an audience. Meanwhile, standing in the aisle beside her rightful seat was the black woman, the actual owner of the boarding pass. She remained completely still. Her hands were relaxed, her breathing steady, her eyes calm. She wore patience like armor, not forced, but something that had clearly been shaped by years of similar experiences. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She did not make accusations. She simply waited. Her silence, far from showing weakness, radiated a kind of strength that unsettled even the loudest passengers. It wasn't resignation, it was intentional, deliberate grace. She seemed to understand that the more the other woman shouted, the more foolish she looked. Her quiet presence allowed everyone around her to see the truth without her having to say a single word. A flight attendant approached her first, speaking softly, hoping to calm the escalating tension. "Ma'am, thank you for your patience. We're trying to sort this out. Can I confirm that this is your assigned seat?" The woman nodded and handed over her boarding pass. The attendant read it carefully, her brow tightening with concern. Everything matched. The flight number, the seat number, the name. It was clear and simple. There was no mistake on the black woman's part. When the attendant turned to the woman in the seat, the difference in attitude was stark. "Ma'am, may I please see your boarding pass?" "No," the woman snapped immediately. "I already told you, I'm sitting here. Why should I have to prove anything? She's the one trying to take my seat." The flight attendant tried again, keeping her tone professional even though frustration was building. "Ma'am, we need to verify your seat assignment so we can resolve the issue." "I said no," the woman repeated, louder this time. She sank deeper into the plush seat as though anchoring herself to it. "I'm not moving. And I'm not giving you anything. This is my seat. End of story." A murmur rippled through the cabin. People exchanged glances, some sympathetic toward the patient woman standing, others irritated by the stubborn defiance of the woman sitting. No one spoke up, but the expressions said enough. Most passengers could see exactly who was in the wrong. A second flight attendant arrived, followed by a third. Their presence made the scene feel heavier, more official. Passengers adjusted their posture, sensing that the situation was being taken seriously. One of the attendants tried a gentler approach. "Ma'am, we understand you may be frustrated. But we need to see your ticket. It's standard procedure. Why don't you go bother someone else?" The woman snapped. "I'm not giving you anything. I'm not moving. If she wants a seat so badly, she can sit in economy where she belongs." The words hit the cabin like a slap. Some passengers sucked in a breath. Others looked at the woman in disbelief. A man near the aisle muttered under his breath, "That's out of line." A woman behind them whispered, "How is she not embarrassed saying things like that?" But the black woman still said nothing. Her eyes remained calm, her posture unchanged. Despite the sting of the insult, she held her composure with remarkable strength. It was clear to everyone watching that she carried herself with dignity, not because she was trying to impress anyone, but because dignity was simply part of who she was. She refused to be dragged into a shouting match or to defend her worth to someone who was determined not to see it. The flight attendants exchanged uncomfortable glances. They could feel the weight of the moment. They knew that if they did not handle the situation carefully, it could turn into a viral scandal, a lawsuit, or worse, a dangerous disruption on board. They needed to maintain control, but the woman in the seat was making that nearly impossible. "Ma'am," one attendant said more firmly, "we cannot allow the flight to depart until this matter is resolved. We need your boarding pass." And I'm telling you, the woman growled, that I don't have to give it to you. Why are you all harassing me? Can't you see I belong in this seat? Her voice rose with each word, rising into a near yell. The black woman remained still, her eyes focused not on the woman stealing her seat but on something distant, something internal. She exuded a quiet confidence that made her seem untouchable. She wasn't trying to win an argument. She wasn't trying to prove a point. She simply knew the truth, and she was waiting for everyone else to catch up. As tension continued to build, the woman in the seat started shifting uncomfortably, even though she tried to hide it. Her confidence was beginning to crack around the edges. Maybe it was the way passengers were staring. Maybe it was the flight attendant's growing firmness. Maybe it was the silence of the woman she'd insulted so loudly, a silence that seemed to highlight her own behavior more clearly than any words could. But still, she refused to give in. A flight attendant spoke to her again. "Ma'am, please understand, if you do not show your boarding pass, we will have to involve the captain." "Good," she snapped. "Get him. I want him to see what kind of nonsense I'm dealing with. Maybe he'll actually do something about people pretending to belong in first class." The black woman blinked slowly, her expression unreadable but steady. She didn't need to defend herself. She didn't need to explain. Her very presence spoke louder than anything she could say. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, many of them now avoiding eye contact with the woman in the seat. They were embarrassed for her, even though she felt no shame. The flight attendants, realizing that discussion was pointless, stepped back to call the captain. As they moved away, one of them paused and turned to the standing woman with a soft, apologetic smile. It was small, subtle, but sincere, an unspoken acknowledgement that she was being treated unfairly. The woman nodded gently in return, accepting the gesture without making a scene. She understood that the attendants were trying their best within the limits of their roles. Her calmness seemed to comfort them, as if her presence alone made the chaos easier to handle. The cabin fell into a tense, uneasy quiet as everyone waited for the captain to arrive. The woman who had taken the seat resumed fiddling with her phone, though her hands trembled slightly, betraying a growing sense of unease she hoped no one would notice. The black woman remained motionless beside the seat, still calm, still quiet, still dignified. She stood there with the quiet strength of someone who had fought far bigger battles than a stolen airplane seat, someone who had learned that sometimes silence carries more power than argument. And though no one yet knew her identity or her status, every passenger watching her could sense that she was not just any ordinary traveler. There was something about her, something grounded, something unshakable, something deeply commanding, that made it clear she was a woman who belonged exactly where she was standing. Only the woman in the stolen seat hadn't realized that yet. The tension in the first-class cabin was palpable as the argument between the two women continued to simmer. Whispers and murmurs rippled through the rows as passengers tried to watch without being obvious, some craning their necks, others pretending to read magazines, all secretly captivated by the confrontation. The woman sitting in the seat refused to budge, arms crossed, eyes blazing, lips pressed into a thin line of defiance. She tapped her fingers impatiently on the armrest, occasionally muttering insults under her breath, making sure the standing woman heard every one of them. The standing woman, the rightful passenger, remained calm, composed, her posture upright, her breathing steady, and her gaze fixed ahead, as though she were an immovable rock in the middle of a storm. The flight attendants hovered nearby, trying to mediate with gentle but firm requests, but their presence seemed to irritate the seated woman more than anything else. Her voice rose, tinged with frustration, as she barked dismissive remarks, insisting that she belonged in that seat. The more she spoke, the more the surrounding passengers noticed the arrogance in her words, the cruelty in her tone, and the audacity in her assumption that she could override the rules of the flight without consequence. It wasn't long before the lead flight attendant, realizing that her attempts at diplomacy were failing, excused herself to fetch the captain. The click of her shoes against the aisle floor echoed through the cabin as she moved quickly toward the cockpit, leaving the two women and the restless crowd of passengers in suspense. The standing woman shifted slightly but remained calm, her hands folded loosely in front of her, her eyes surveying the situation with quiet patience. She understood that this confrontation was not just about a seat, it was about human behavior, about arrogance confronting integrity, and she had no intention of lowering herself to the other woman's level. She simply waited. The seated woman, on the other hand, fumed. She could feel the change in the cabin atmosphere, the subtle judgment of passengers staring, and the slight unease creeping into her carefully constructed sense of authority. She tugged at her handbag strap as if it were a shield, her shoulders rigid, her chin high, projecting the illusion of control even as the reality of the situation began to slip away from her. Within moments, the captain emerged from the cockpit, tall, confident, with a presence that immediately drew attention. His uniform was crisp, his demeanor calm yet authoritative. The moment he stepped into the first-class cabin, the chatter and tension seemed to hush slightly, as if everyone instinctively recognized that his word would carry the final authority in this matter. Passengers turned their heads, some in curiosity, some in relief, hoping that this figure of command would resolve the escalating dispute. The captain's eyes scanned the scene, taking in the two women, the cluster of flight attendants, and the growing collection of onlookers, and he immediately understood the gravity of the situation. He could see the defiance in the seated woman's posture, the calm resolve in the standing woman's expression, and the mounting unease of those caught in the middle. There was no doubt in his mind about what had transpired, but protocol demanded that he act methodically, professionally, and without bias. He approached the row, his steps measured, and addressed the woman in the seat first. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but firm, carrying over the low murmurs of the cabin, "may I see your boarding pass for this seat?" He extended his hand politely but without wavering. The woman froze, her hand hovering above her handbag as if she could conjure a boarding pass. Out of thin air, her lips parted, then closed, then parted again. I don't, well, I don't have it with me," she stuttered, her confidence faltering. She glanced around, hoping perhaps for support from nearby passengers, but found only raised eyebrows and eyes fixed on her in disbelief. The smugness that had defined her tone from the start began to crack, replaced by a nervous edge she was unprepared to handle. The captain didn't rush her, didn't press, but his gaze was steady, unwavering, and unyielding. "I understand," he said evenly, "but without your boarding pass, we cannot confirm your right to occupy this seat. We need to ensure all passengers are seated according to their assignment before takeoff." The seated woman's cheeks flushed slightly. She fumbled with her bag, pretending to search for a non-existent ticket, tossing items from one side to the other with exaggerated annoyance. Passengers watched silently, some with barely contained amusement, others with thinly veiled irritation at her theatrics. She finally dropped back into the seat, muttering under her breath about inefficiency and incompetence, but she offered no proof, no ticket, no credible claim to the seat. The captain simply nodded once, as if noting the situation, and then turned his attention to the woman who had remained silent all along. "Ma'am," he said, now addressing the standing woman, "may I see your boarding pass?" The black woman extended her hand with quiet confidence, her fingers holding the ticket delicately, her posture as composed as ever. The captain took it, glancing at it carefully, scanning the details with practiced efficiency. Flight number, seat number, name, boarding zone, all perfectly aligned. He glanced back at her, and the corners of his eyes lifted slightly, a recognition flickering across his otherwise controlled expression. He paused for a moment, allowing the weight of the realization to settle. The standing woman wasn't just any passenger. The calm authority she exuded, the patience, the dignity, it all aligned perfectly with the person he instantly recognized. There was no need for formal introduction, no need for ceremony. He knew exactly who she was. The woman's eyes met his, calm but slightly wary, acknowledging his recognition without the need for words. In that instant, the balance of the cabin shifted subtly. Every passenger, every flight attendant, every observer could feel it even if they didn't yet understand why. There was a gravity to her presence, a silent command that made it clear she belonged here far more than the woman who had claimed her seat. The seated woman, oblivious to the recognition passing silently between the captain and the standing woman, continued to fume. She shifted impatiently in the seat, tapping her fingers, muttering about unfair treatment, completely unaware that the authority in the room had already acknowledged her fault. Her attempts at dominance, her insistence on entitlement, were rendered powerless against the quiet dignity of the woman she had sought to belittle. The captain, sensing the futility of further discussion with her, allowed a subtle shift in his posture, a small change in tone, that made it clear this woman's seat was not in question. Passengers felt the tension start to ease, even if they didn't know why. There was a silent, almost imperceptible signal that the situation was now firmly in control. The standing woman, meanwhile, remained patient, her eyes calm, her expression neutral, but there was a spark of awareness in her gaze, a recognition of the acknowledgement, a quiet satisfaction that justice would be served without her needing to argue, without her needing to raise her voice. Her patience was a shield, her composure a quiet form of power that left everyone else in the cabin unsettled and impressed at once. The flight attendants exchanged relieved glances. The captain's recognition alone was enough to guarantee that the dispute would be resolved swiftly. There was no question about the legitimacy of the standing woman's claim, and the seated woman's protests were now meaningless, almost comical in their futility. The captain's quiet authority, combined with the standing woman's calm presence, made it abundantly clear to all that the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. The seated woman's face drained of color slightly as she began to sense the magnitude of the error she had made. She had underestimated not only the patience and composure of the rightful passenger but also the authority and discernment of the captain. Every moment she spent in that seat without a boarding pass now felt increasingly precarious, the weight of exposure pressing down on her like an invisible hand. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to maintain the illusion of control, but the tension was visible, undeniable, and growing with every second. The standing woman remained perfectly still, the embodiment of calm and dignity. She did not gloat, did not gesture, did not issue a single word of rebuke. She simply held herself with quiet assurance, allowing the situation to resolve itself in her favor naturally. Her composure contrasted sharply with the seated woman's flustered arrogance, making the disparity painfully obvious to all onlookers. Finally, the captain's gaze returned fully to the seated woman. He spoke calmly but with a firmness that brooked no argument. "Ma'am, without a valid boarding pass, you cannot occupy this seat. You must return to your assigned seat immediately." His tone carried the weight of authority, a signal to the entire cabin that the matter was now conclusively settled. The seated woman hesitated, her fingers clutching the armrests as if they could anchor her to the illusion of power she had tried to project. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words faltered, caught in the realization that she had been exposed. The passengers exhaled collectively, some relieved, others still in awe of the calm tension that had dominated the cabin for the past several minutes. The flight attendant stepped forward gently to escort the seated woman back to her correct seat, guiding her carefully but firmly, while the standing woman remained in her rightful place, serene, unshaken, and quietly triumphant. The captain gave a final, approving nod to the standing woman, a subtle acknowledgement of recognition that required no explanation. Every passenger who witnessed it understood, even if they didn't yet know why, that this was a woman of remarkable stature, a presence commanding respect without a single word of demand. The cabin settled into a new rhythm as the seated woman was removed and order restored. The standing woman's patience and dignity had done what words could not. She had asserted her rightful place, commanded respect, and allowed the truth to speak for itself. The passengers continued to steal glances at her, some with curiosity, some with admiration, all aware that they had just witnessed an extraordinary display of quiet authority, calm confidence, and the subtle but unmistakable power of integrity recognized by those who mattered most. The cabin seemed to hold its breath the moment the captain straightened his posture, his gaze meeting the calm, composed woman who had been standing patiently all along. He lifted his hand in a crisp, formal salute, the gesture precise, unwavering, and utterly respectful. Every passenger felt the weight of the moment, the kind of pause in time when ordinary rules seemed to bend, when authority and recognition aligned in perfect clarity. "Ma'am," the captain said, his voice steady and commanding, "we're honored to have you on board." His words carried not just respect, but awe, a reverence that immediately shifted the energy in the cabin. The contrast between the confident authority of the woman standing and the flustered arrogance of the woman in the stolen seat was now starkly apparent to everyone. Whispers rippled through the rows, growing louder as passengers tried to process what they were witnessing. Eyes widened, mouths opened slightly in disbelief, and a few people instinctively leaned forward, craning their necks to get a better look. The woman in the stolen seat froze, her earlier defiance draining from her features as the captain's words landed like a sudden, unavoidable truth. She blinked, her lips parting, trying to form words, but nothing came. For the first time since boarding, her composure faltered. The smug, self-assured demeanor she had carried so arrogantly throughout the ordeal was gone, replaced by the rigid stillness of someone caught in the act of a grave misjudgment. She glanced around at the other passengers, hoping perhaps for allies, but found none. The sympathetic, astonished, or even amused gazes of the passengers made it painfully clear that she had overstepped every line imaginable. The captain's tone remained firm but courteous, unwavering in its authority. "Ma'am," he continued, turning his attention to the woman who had been patiently standing, "thank you for your patience. It is an honor to have someone of your stature on board." His voice carried a weight that made it impossible to ignore, and even passengers who were unfamiliar with aviation protocol sensed the significance. Some whispered to their neighbors, speculating on the identity of the woman in first class, while others simply stared, awestruck, at the quiet dignity she exuded. She did not respond immediately, her calm demeanor unshaken, but there was a subtle acknowledgement in her eyes, a hint of gratitude beneath the surface. She understood the gesture, recognized the recognition, and allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible nod. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted dramatically. Where moments earlier there had been tension, frustration, and the awkward discomfort of an unresolved conflict, now there was a clear understanding. The balance of power had decisively shifted. Every passenger, flight attendant, and crew member could feel it. The woman in the stolen seat, once brazen and defiant, now sat frozen, realizing that her claim was not only false but untenable in the presence of authority that could not be challenged. Her attempts at dominance, her words dripping with entitlement, all seemed trivial now, like echoes from another world. The captain turned to one of the flight attendants and spoke in a low, deliberate voice. "Please have security escort this passenger to her assigned seat immediately. The aircraft will not taxi until this matter is resolved." There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. The words were final, and they carried a clarity that left no room for negotiation. The seated woman's eyes widened in panic as she realized that not only had she been exposed, but she was about to be physically removed from the seat she had so arrogantly claimed. She shifted in her seat, clutching the armrests as if they could somehow anchor her to the illusion of power she had tried to project, but it was already gone. Passengers watched in stunned silence as security personnel approached. The team moved with practiced efficiency, professional and discreet, yet firm enough to convey that compliance was not optional. The seated woman tried to protest, her voice trembling, sputtering accusations about unfair treatment and bureaucratic incompetence, but no one listened. The captain's eyes, steady and unwavering, conveyed that the matter was settled. The words of authority and recognition he had spoken were sufficient, and no further argument could alter the truth. The standing woman remained composed, her posture unwavering, her expression calm. She did not gloat, did not issue commands, did not make demands. She simply continued to embody dignity and poise, allowing the process to unfold naturally. Her patience had been a shield, her restraint, a quiet form of power. Every move she made, every moment of composure she displayed, reinforced the undeniable truth. She was exactly where she belonged, and the seat she was assigned was rightfully hers. The security personnel guided the seated woman down the aisle, her protests fading into mutters of indignation and disbelief. She threw one last glance at the standing woman, a mixture of frustration, embarrassment, and awe flickering across her features, though it was clear that no words could reverse the situation. Passengers returned their attention to the calm woman, many now staring openly, some with admiration, some with whispered comments about her presence and authority. Even flight attendants exchanged subtle, knowing glances, silently acknowledging the grace and strength she displayed throughout the ordeal. The captain returned to the standing woman, his tone softening slightly while retaining the unmistakable authority that had commanded the cabin's attention. "Ma'am, please have a seat. Your patience and composure have been exemplary, and it is a privilege to have you with us." The words, though understated, carried a profound respect that resonated throughout the cabin. There was no ceremony, no fanfare, only acknowledgement, dignity, and the quiet power of recognition. The passengers felt it. They could see it. They could almost hear the silence echo with the weight of authority and respect. As the woman settled into her rightful seat, a sense of relief and satisfaction seemed to ripple through the cabin. The tension that had gripped the first-class section moments earlier dissipated, replaced by a quiet hum of acknowledgement and respect. Passengers shifted in their seats, some still wide-eyed, some whispering to one another, others simply watching, impressed by the display of dignity, authority, and calm power. The contrast between her composed presence and the embarrassment of the seated woman had left a lasting impression on everyone. The captain gave one final nod toward her, a silent salute that acknowledged not only her status but also her patience and the grace with which she had handled the situation. She returned the nod, subtle but deliberate, an acknowledgement of mutual respect. The cabin seemed to exhale collectively, as if the air itself had been tense for too long and could finally relax now that justice had been quietly but definitively served. Passengers began to whisper, some speculating about the woman's identity, others commenting on the extraordinary poise and authority she had displayed. A few snapped pictures discreetly with their phones, others simply sat back, eyes fixed on her, absorbing the scene. The standing woman did not react to the attention. She neither acknowledged the stares nor responded to the murmurs. She had no need to. Her calm authority was enough, and it had spoken, louder than any words or gestures could. Meanwhile, the captain walked to the cockpit, issuing final instructions to the crew to ensure that the aircraft would remain stationary until the situation was completely resolved. Taxiing, takeoff, and departure were all secondary to the assertion of rightful order and respect. This was not merely about a seat. It was about recognizing authority, patience, and integrity. Every passenger understood that. Even those who had initially judged the situation lightly now grasped the seriousness of what had transpired. The woman in her rightful seat adjusted slightly, settling into the luxurious cushion of first class with ease and comfort. Her presence seemed to fill the cabin with an invisible weight, a quiet power that no one could ignore. She did not smile, she did not boast, she did not demand acknowledgement. Instead, she radiated calm authority, a reminder that dignity, patience, and quiet strength could overcome arrogance, entitlement, and disrespect. Passengers whispered again, many in awe, some quietly laughing at the audacity of the woman who had been removed. Others quietly admired the quiet, commanding presence of the woman now seated. Flight attendants returned to their posts, visibly relieved that the conflict had been resolved without escalation, without drama beyond the initial confrontation. The cabin settled into a rhythm once more, but the memory of the scene lingered, etched into the minds of everyone present. The seated woman, now escorted back to her proper place, slumped in her seat, subdued and humiliated, a stark contrast to the composure and elegance of the woman who had commanded the cabin without raising her voice. She muttered complaints to the nearest attendant, but her words carried no power, no weight, no authority. The truth had prevailed, and everyone in the cabin could see it. As the plane finally prepared for departure, passengers stole glances at the woman in her seat. Some whispered quietly, others shook their heads in disbelief at the encounter they had witnessed. They could not deny the aura of authority she carried, the calm patience that had allowed her to navigate the situation with complete dignity. She was a presence that demanded respect without needing to assert it aggressively, and in that, she had achieved a quiet but undeniable victory. The captain gave one last confirmation over the intercom, ensuring that the plane would not move until the proper seating arrangements were fully settled. Passengers settled back into their seats, some reflecting on the extraordinary event, others marveling at the patience and strength displayed. The standing woman, now fully seated, allowed herself a brief moment of relaxation, her expression unchanged, her calm authority intact. The cabin had witnessed a lesson in dignity, power, and respect, a lesson that would linger long after the plane reached its cruising altitude. And in that quiet, unspoken acknowledgement, it was clear to everyone present, she belonged there, not just in the seat, not just on the plane, but in the space of authority, integrity, and unwavering composure that few could ever claim.